order. This is the regular school board meeting of the Northfield Public Schools. It is Monday, September 22nd, 7 p.m. Dr. Richardson, there were a couple items in our table file.
Yes, we've got some normal personnel items in terms of appointments, increase, decrease, and change in assignment, leaves of absence, and TRA part-time teacher program set up. We also are going to ask in the consent agenda for your approval of a addition to the District Youth Council to replace another student who was unable to continue, and that's Olivia Riggins. And so would like you to go ahead and approve that as part of the consent agenda. And then the last piece is the Metro Sales copier lease. And typically we would not bring that to the board because it's just the ongoing operation of the system, but wanted to highlight this, number one, because the copier company would like a record of the fact that the board has decided on it. But I think the other really positive thing is I think the work of the district administrative services folks in terms of reviewing copier options. We're looking now at 16 copiers being placed in the district at about a $1,255 exactly at $1,255.77 per month savings compared to the expiring lease. So it's going to give us, I think, a good option to bring all those up to the newest models. Also, because we're continuing with the same type of copier, there will be a very limited amount of training needed to make this happen. So we see this as a real positive piece for the system, and I wanted just to alert you to the fact that that's part of the consent agenda tonight.
Very good. If there's no objection, we'll add these to the agenda as we move forward. All right. We are ready to move on to public comment. This is an opportunity for members of the school district to address the board. Is there anyone here who wishes to address the board? All right. We will move on to approval of the minutes. Board members, you have in your packet the minutes from the last school board meeting, which was held on September 8th. Is there a motion to approve these minutes?
So moved.
Moved by Carrie.
Second.
Seconded by Julie. Any discussion? All those in favor of approving the minutes say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. The minutes are approved. Announcements and recognition.
Yes, I do have a couple of this evening for your information. First of all, we have 7 former Northfield High School athletes are going to be inducted into the Northfield High School Athletic Hall of Fame on Friday, September the 26th as part of the homecoming celebration. The induction ceremony is sponsored by the Northfield Booster Club and the Northfield High School. The induction ceremony will be at 4:30 p.m. in the Northfield High School auditorium. The 7 new members being inducted will join 120 current members of the Hall of Fame. 2014 inductees are Jim Enfield, class of 1964, Troy Tonziger, class of 1984, Tracy Patrika Frakes, class of 1994, Brooke Larson Plotz, class of 1995, Mark Mokoff, class of 1997, Matt Geiger, class of 1998, and Jason Holm, class of 1998. In addition, we'll be celebrating the 25th year of the Northfield High School Hall of Fame, so we invited back all of those in our Hall of Fame. At halftime of the homecoming football game versus Mankato East, we'll be introducing all the inductees and current Northfield High School Athletic Hall of Famers. This will be a great evening, and we invite all interested community members to attend. Second piece that we have as announcements is the public is invited to a tailgating party sponsored by the Northfield Booster Club and Rally. That's the Raider Activity Leaders Improving Enthusiasm prior to the homecoming football game on the 26th. The tailgate party will be held at the north entrance of Memorial Field starting at 5:30. Hamburgers, hot dogs, chips, water, soda will be served. The price for this meal deal is only $3, with all proceeds going to the Northfield Booster Club.
All right. Any other announcements? No? All right.
Okay.
We already moved on to our first item. We're welcoming Mark Hayes back from ATS&R to give us report on planning for the future.
Good evening. Boy, you guys really moved things along. That really went quick. Now, good evening. Thank you for inviting me back. What we wanted to do tonight was, although your specific needs in the Northfield District are unique, what you're encountering in terms of deferred maintenance needs, education adequacy needs, trying to accommodate the 21st century learners is not that unique. So through our work with a lot of other districts, through lots of other facility plans, we wanted to share with you some of the approaches that we've seen other districts do in terms of how to accommodate some of your needs. So with that, I do believe everybody has a copy of the handout in front of them. And so what we started out with was, we just, on the left-hand side, we identified kind of the 3 areas of concern, and that really is those 3 items that I mentioned. We talked about you have deferred maintenance needs district-wide, and then we just highlighted a few bullet points in terms of, the drop-off, secure entrances, needs in terms of maintaining that exterior envelope, the roofs, the windows, et cetera, as well as some of your mechanical, electrical system needs. And then we have the adequacy, kind of the educational adequacy, program accommodation type needs that we identified. We talked about those in more detail. And then lastly, the teaching and learning is really the items that Mr. Tapper, I think, brought up at the last board workshop that we attended, looking at how to accommodate kind of the needs of 21st century learners. So those are the 3 items of concern that we identified, and then we talked about what approaches a district may take. And this is somewhat of a continuum, starting out with no modifications to facilities, not necessarily do nothing, but no modifications in terms of architectural or facility modifications, down to grade reconfiguration of buildings, repurposing buildings, to addition or numerous additions to a facility, and then lastly, maybe the idea of needing to construct a new facility of some sort. So the first approach was no facility modifications. And then over on the right where it says best practices, so even though that means we might not do something to the building, the district or a board might look at doing things in terms of maybe changes to your policy, program changes, maybe identifying or creating a magnet school to attract certain students to certain buildings, things like that, and maybe looking at boundary issues and some of those sorts of things. So that, I didn't have a whole lot to say about that one, but there, you can do some things from a policy or program standpoint to accommodate some of those concerns. Now again, that wouldn't necessarily address some of the other things that I mentioned, deferred maintenance and some of those. The next approach is to reconfigure existing building spaces. And I have a couple examples, or some examples, some from the Minnetonka School District, some from the Owatonna School District. And before I do that, though, even though this is not a specific example, I wanted to share with you, this is a strategy that we've developed, and we shared this at, I'm sure we've talked about the Council of Educational and Facility Planners International, CFPI. We're members of that organization, and I'm sure we touched on this. 2010, I believe it was, we presented this concept for the Classroom of 2020, one of 2 firms selected to present at the conference, and then 2012, they wanted to see something regarding the Classroom of Today. So we developed this that we called Engage, Classroom of Today, but it's showing people, educators, districts, how you can start to incorporate some of these 21st century learning type educational needs into existing buildings. So a lot of buildings are like the example that we show as Tier 1, where we call it, like the bells and cells, but basically it's the hallway, double-loaded corridor with, 800, 900 square foot classrooms on each side. Well, the first thing you can do is just start to incorporate some technology into the space and some furniture, flexible furniture into the space. Easy to do, doesn't require any modifications to any architectural systems, mechanical systems, yes, electrical and technology systems. But that's the Tier 1, and what that's showing is that one side of the hallway you might not do anything, on the other side of the hallway you might start to incorporate some of those technology and furniture modifications. Tier 2 is just taking it to the next level. It's starting to incorporate some of that technology and and new furniture to allow different sort of configurations, collaboration into all the spaces. And then if you look really closely, you can see we're starting to even incorporate maybe some windows into the hallway, try to create some transparency and connection to the other spaces. When we get to Tier 3, that's where you start to do a little bit of, maybe you can break down and start to erode some of those interior walls to create some larger spaces, even to create in the very upper left corner, starting to create, so maybe some smaller spaces for collaboration, for small groups. But remember the idea of trying to create this variety of spaces, large, small, multi-purpose type of spaces. So that's what that's starting to do with our example of Tier 3. And then Tier 4 is really, I don't want to call it taking it to the extreme, but really just taking it, to maybe the next level, which is really somewhat of a total reallocation of some of those spaces, but again, just to create the variety of spaces, some staff planning areas, and this, I apologize, it's really small, but this is even an example of where the staff planning is kind of right in that student area, so it's really great connection and access between students and staff. So this is something that we presented, and then actually in that dashed red line in the corner, lower right corner, that's actually the mock-up that we did at the CFPI where people could come in and walk around and kind of see some of these ideas. And then, of course, we have now been incorporating some of these ideas into real buildings. Here's some examples. I think what we have here is 3 examples of some media centers, elementary media centers with the Minnetonka School District. And so they've somewhat been on a mission to update and enhance their media centers. And I would say, well, depending on the building, sometimes media centers are good places to identify some underutilized spaces. I think the amount of periodicals and things like that maybe aren't as plentiful or as needed as they used to be, so there might be some consolidation of that happening. Lots of these periodical storage in some of those spaces that maybe aren't being used, you can kind of repurpose some of those spaces. So what we're doing is we're starting to create and enhance the entrance and the visibility and the transparency to connect the students to the space and see what's happening inside the space. So there's a little bit of a before and after picture shown there. Within that space, there's the before picture on the upper left, the after picture on the lower right. So it's just, creating some more durable finishes in terms of hard surfaces on the floor, improving access to different sorts of technology in different areas where students can access to technology, where it's individual or in groups. And, maybe the idea of just taller volumes or taller stacks of periodicals, whereas you can see in the original picture they were low stacks, maybe getting them up a little bit higher to make those a little bit more efficient. And then more examples of the types of variety of spaces, and even down to just little, kind of window seats where students just love to sit by themselves and learn on their own, but still allow areas like you can see on the lower left where you can have the larger groups where there's a teacher working with that group. I think natural light is important, the connection to the outdoors, the rest of the building, and these are just more examples of access to technology, multiple types of learning spaces. And then another example. I really like the one on the upper right. Again, it's Minnetonka, and there's kind of this nautical motif in Minnetonka, and they kind of created these, what are they, porticos? Portholes. Portholes, yeah, not a portico. Portholes, and they, we turned them into little seating areas. Oops, and again, the students just love to sit in those little portholes and read off on their own. The lower right one, I think, happens to actually be Austin, but again, just spaces for students to sit, learn on their own, a lot of natural light. This is an example of the Owatonna School District, Owatonna High School. So again, this is just a repurposing of an existing house. Owatonna High School has a number of houses, and they took one of the houses. I don't believe they really changed the number of students that they could accommodate in the space, but it was just a fairly straightforward remodeling of their existing space. And the idea, again, was creating multiple and a variety of spaces. Spaces that could be enlarged or reduced to accommodate larger, smaller groups by incorporating some folding walls, actually breaking down the walls that used to create the staff offices or staff planning areas. So again, another example of the staff are really right out there with the students, to create great collaboration between staff and students and as well among each staff. So there's some original images of the space. So it's a central space surrounded by a number of classrooms. There's a very large skylight that was existing in the center of that space. And then it was just, again, opening it up, creating some transparency to see what's happening inside those walls, to create some excitement and some interest for the other students. And this is an example of kind of the before and after of, before it was more of a typical maybe computer lab with kind of structured linear computer stations, and now it's, again, a variety of spaces for different sorts of groups of students to get together and collaborate. Very, very, very upper left, as you can kind of see a corner of what used to be that staff office, which is now really, like I said, just really taken out of there and removed, and it's just low office partitions that define the staff space. Another example of before and after of a classroom, and what the example shows on the lower right is really that space that can be opened up and to accommodate, up to 90 students or like 3 classrooms if you need. You've got multiple projection screens, and you even have some variety in the tables, so that the idea being that the students up towards the front of the room are sitting at lower tables, and then the students at the back of them are sitting at some of those high top tables, so you even get that tiered effect of in a large group presentation that the students in the back can see what's going on towards the front of the room. Another approach is to reconfigure, grade reconfiguration and building utilization. We've got a couple examples. The first one being Fergus Falls Public Schools and then Maranatha Christian Academy. Fergus Falls Public Schools, they were seeing declining enrollment. They had aging facilities, a lot of deferred maintenance needs. And so, again, through a lot of study and looking at lots of different approaches for the district, what they ended up doing was closing at least one facility, reconfiguring their elementaries to make a K2 and a 3-5 elementary, additions to the elementary, additions to the K5 elementary. They also had an old high school across the street from what was the middle school. And anyway, we ended up really tearing down a good portion of that existing high school and moving a lot of the spaces over to the middle school, which is now called the secondary school. So this really happens to be an example of some additions and alterations, because we really kind of took what was a middle school, made it a secondary school. Like a lot of districts, we're showing an image here of that main entrance. It's a large campus. Where's the front door? Creating that prominent entrance, a secure entrance is always important. And then also the idea that now you're bringing some high school students into the space, where it used to be middle school students, and creating appropriate spaces for those older students, spaces where they can, if they do well or whatever, that they can be out on their own and they can be just socializing with other students or working on small groups with other students, but yet still able to be supervised. Lower right slide, I apologize, hard to read, but I think it says something like middle school attendance. In this case, there happen to be concerns about a bigger school, separation of the middle school and the high school students, so we created separate student service areas for the younger students and for the older students, a separate wing for the older students and separation of the younger students. So that's something that sometimes becomes an issue that we can accommodate in these additions and alterations. Now you're taking and bringing all the students into one building. Even things like student pride is important in the school store with the logo wear and things like that is even becomes something of a concern or something to think about. These are just more examples of different sorts of spaces for the students and different ways to access technology throughout the building. And this was the Maranatha Christian Academy. This happens to be one where they had 2 campuses consolidated into one campus. And really this slide just shows again the idea that you used to have a couple buildings, now you've got one building, and now they've got one mascot, one logo, just that sense of school pride and things like that as you walk in the front door is important. And this just happens to be an example of kind of an older type of computer lab. The other approach is to repurpose buildings. We've got a couple examples, one from Rochester and one from Anoka Hennepin. Rochester School District, you guys might be familiar with this, and I must say I'm not, 100%, I wasn't involved in this project, but there was the Northfield School, and they converted that. So sometimes you have an old building, and it might be more difficult, more cost-effective to try to convert that old building to be some other function, whether in this case it happened to be adult education, preschool, district offices, community center, things like that, versus trying to take an old building and bring it up to today's needs in terms of whether it be science labs or teaching spaces and things like that. And so in this case, the decision was to repurpose that building to be something else other than a school, like it says, adult education, preschool, et cetera, but yet still preserving that important building in the school district. And sustainability, and green is a huge thing nowadays. And what is the most sustainable thing you can do but to keep an old building and to repurpose it and keep it in use? I mean, that's the most sustainable thing you can do with a building, I think. And then it's just a matter of taking that existing building, updating it to provide new spaces, whether it be the early childhood or entry lobbies, access to levels, and elevator access, ADA accommodations, et cetera, to existing buildings certainly need to be considered. And then lastly, this is an example of Anoka Hennepin. It was Sandburg Middle School. Again, repurposed it to be basically kind of their district offices, administrative type spaces, remodeled the front entrance, created a boardroom up there for meetings such as this, but just repurposing that older, but yet still feasible, durable, good bones and structure type of building. The next one is, the next approach is additions, certainly, whether it's one addition or multiple additions. We've got one little example of Burnsville, Egan Savage, some from Minnetonka that you may have seen some of these images, and then Anoka Hennepin at the end. Burnsville High School, we've been remodeling Burnsville High School for the last 4 years. They just finished the last of the remodeling, in August. Happens to be the school I graduated from high school in. And so we did a lot of repurposing of existing spaces at Burnsville High School, not even doing any additions. And that was looking at the utilization, looking at, remember when we talked a while ago about let's see, how do I phrase it? Like the utilization, the master schedule, and the utilization of your classrooms, meaning, right now at your high school, you're about, I think, 5 out of 7 periods a day. If we looked at doing it 5.75 out of 7 periods, you could increase the utilization of those classrooms. Well, Burnsville High School had declining enrollment in the district, and we looked at that utilization. We increased the utilization of that building a little bit, better utilized the staff planning areas and created more staff planning areas, allowed better use of the classrooms, and that freed up something like 7 classrooms and a couple science labs, and also looking at the underutilized spaces in the buildings. They had a very large media center, huge media center. We ended up putting 3 computer labs in this existing media center, and still kept the media center. They had in-school suspension that accommodated maybe a dozen students in a large lecture facility, lecture room. Anyway, so looking at those existing underutilized spaces, as well as increasing the efficiency of the utilization of this master schedule, allowed us to go in and reconfigure the building. We moved the main office to the front. Their cafeteria, their serving area was very inefficient, things like that. Able to make a lot of improvements to that building. And I apologize, I don't have any pictures of that, but that's still, we just finished the construction of that. But one of the other things that was an issue was the building entrance and the image. And it was a very large campus. We moved the main office to the front of the building. What used to be the old main entry, the only way you could tell it was the main entry was maybe that it had red brick. Anyway, but it's set way back off of Highway 13, so the board felt it was important to create a new entry image for the high school. I put it under additions. You could argue whether it was really an addition or not. We didn't really add any occupiable square footage, just a kind of an entry element. Similar to Minnetonka. Minnetonka, needed a controlled, secure entry. They wanted to create an identifiable entry for the public. Before picture is down in the lower right, after picture is in the upper left. Something very identifiable and something you can see as you're approaching from a ways away. It brings a lot of natural light into the building. It creates that connection to the second floor. Similar to Burnsville High School, people walked in, they didn't even know there was a second floor. We opened up the floor, there was a skylight up there, brought natural light down into the building. Similar to Minnetonka, it helps with wayfinding. You get a better understanding of how to get around the building. You create the secure entrance. And in this case, we happen to capture a courtyard at Minnetonka. Minnetonka is just kind of bursting at the seams. Don't have a whole lot of extra space on site. And so what we did there was we took over some of the courtyards, infilled the courtyards to create some spaces, put in some clear story lighting, if you can see that at the, at the upper reaches of that space to bring the natural light in so you can still get some borrowed light into the internal spaces. And this is another example of that courtyard infill. So I think you may have seen this. And remember, maybe we pointed this out, that this right here, this is the outside view of what used to be the courtyard. This is that two-story walkway. That walkway is really this kind of open walkway that's right there on the upper left. And I wish we had students in this picture, but we don't. But this is part of the student commons. And what we did is we created some spaces like the space over on the left where students can gather. There's a bit of a stage where students can perform. There's a big screen up here where they can broadcast ongoing what's happening throughout the day, or I would even believe images up there so they can have presentations up on the wall there. The other thing that we did is there was another courtyard that really they needed a circulation route. Large building, it takes a long time to try to get around the building and to get to different parts. So to improve circulation, reduce travel times, they turned that courtyard into a corridor. What do we do with it? The thought was, well, let's also make it an art gallery to display student artwork. And that's what that is in the upper left. And then the other thing, too, is I think I alluded to this, kind of creating a central area for student services. So you can have the deans, you can have the guidance office, and the counselors, and the career center, and the school store, and some of those sorts of functions all in one local area, not spread out through the building, so that you can create some efficiencies and have one location for the student, student services. So that's one thing that we did here. We've done that at many of our buildings. And then something, too, I just wanted to show you that it's kind of amazing what you can do to rejuvenate, repurpose, upgrade existing facilities. So this was their auditorium. They needed a new lighting system, new sound system, and they just wanted to kind of update the space. And so before is on the upper left and after is the lower right with some LED lighting and just some newer finishes and improved acoustics. Just really does a lot to transform an existing, older type of space. The other thing I haven't mentioned is that, of course, as you're doing any of these things, as you're doing building repurposes, as you're doing additions and alterations, that is a time that, of course, you can be doing anything in terms of the deferred maintenance items. It makes a lot of sense that if you have needs in a certain space, whether it be mechanical, et cetera, when you're remodeling that space, of course, that would be the appropriate time to make some of those deferred maintenance upgrades or investments. And then another idea of, you may not be able to accommodate it with just remodeling existing spaces. Maybe you can, but in this case, some of those core space needs. If there's, if you need to increase the size of some of those core spaces, well, certainly through additions, you might be able to do that. When you do that, it'd be nice to try to make an appropriately sized space. When you have a big space to accommodate a lot of students, nice to get a higher volume, nice to get some natural light in there, et cetera, et cetera. So, example of a new addition to accommodate a cafeteria. And I'm honestly not sure that was remodeling. That might just be a new space. Lastly, of course, a new facility. You can accommodate some needs by building a new facility. I have a couple examples. Austin Public Schools and DeKalb School District, that happens to be in Illinois. This is Austin. So again, we did a facility study with Austin, looked at many, many different approaches to accommodate what they had at the time was increasing enrollment. At the time, we were told one of the few districts in the state that actually had increasing enrollment. How do they address it? What they did after looking at many, many different approaches, they decided to take the 5th graders out of the elementaries, take the 6th graders out of the middle school, and create what they called a 5-6 intermediate STEAM school. So this has that STEAM focus, which was important to the community. Science, technology, engineering, math, and then they put the A in there for arts, the left hand, right hand of the brain type idea. But by doing that too, then you can create a facility that shows the character of the community, what's important to the community. Really hard to see, but I like this slide that if you look super close, up high up here, you can kind of see through the window, and it looks like it might say Spark up there, but that is actually what you see. When you walk in the front door of this building, there's this 2-story banner that has quotes from, educators and inventors and things like that. You can do this with an existing building. It's easier for a new building, but in this case, they really wanted the whole building to be a teaching tool. So there's a 2-story wall that's got feet and meters that goes up, 40 feet. We've got tick marks on the floor with feet and meters, so if you're running, CO2 rockets across the floor, well, how far did it go? Things like that. It was intentional to leave the structure exposed, so maybe if kids are looking around, they might start to understand the electrical and the conduit and the structure and the lighting, et cetera, et cetera. But you can also see, too, if you look close, lots of windows, lots of connection, lots of lighting, connection to all the other spaces so you can see all the activity and the learning that's happening in the building. And then we said, gone are the boxes and rows. So this is the graphic of that 2nd floor of this building. It's basically 3 houses on each level. This is the classroom side. But we've got the way this lays out. The way this lays out quickly is as you approach each house, you've got the student lockers outside. This white box is actually the staff planning area, so you walk right in past the staff planning area. There's actually windows here that look into this open, flexible, we call it a flexible team learning space, off of which lots of views and connections into the classrooms, so that as students are out here working in small groups or individually, they still have that passive supervision, and then even just the furniture and the technology that can be arranged in different ways to accommodate different teaching styles. And then this is where we have these, they're called pivot walls that can be closed and create that connection. What happens to be a science lab. We have these overhead doors that are glass that, again, you can open them up to create that connection to that flexible team learning area. Theoretically, you can open them all up and create a connection among all 3 houses. And I think somebody had asked last time, well, it'd be nice to see some real pictures of this building, because we didn't have those last time. But this is a picture of that flexible team learning area that I talked about a little bit. And this is that staff planning area in the very upper left. So there's the windows right there into the staff area. There's that monitor, which we call that collaborative area, where students can gather around it and hook up to a computer and share ideas. Different sorts of spaces and furniture to accommodate different groupings. We talked about learning is everywhere and learning is on display. On the lower, the very bottom in the center, that's underneath the stair, but that's the windows right into the science lab. They're in the middle of the building, and if you look through that, that's those pivot walls that would connect to the next classroom. And as you come in the front door outside the media center, there's I don't think the word for it, but there's an Einstein. Is that the Einstein bars that you find at Apple?
Genius bar.
Yeah, Genius bar.
I always call it the wrong thing. The Genius bar. Well, anyway, every student has a laptop, so this is where they can go and they can get their laptop serviced, or they can just get together and work together. And then lastly, just some more of the differentiated types of learning environments. And then some examples of, this happens to be an elementary school in DeKalb. The one thing about this, to them, the media center was still, I shouldn't say this still, but the media center was really the heart of the school. So the whole building was designed around the media center, which is a 2-story space off of which all the other classroom houses could view and Another lower left is a flexible team learning area, which there were students in it. Not quite as big as the one that you see at Austin, but same idea, the breakout space with the windows into the staff planning areas and the classrooms. And then upper right happens to be DeKalb High School, but it's one of those, it's the commons area where the high school students can just gather and socialize and study, and happens to be a fireplace. So I think that's the end of my slides.
Mark, can you back up
Yes.
to the slide before that? Talk to him about the overhead door piece on this
Yeah, so again, that was
left-hand side.
that overhead door that I showed in that overall concept slide. But yeah, it's a door that when it's down, it's transparent. You can see through it. You can see the activity that's happening inside. The teacher, that's inside. If they have students outside in that flexible team learning area, can still supervise the students. But then you can open that up, and you can just actually have that science space flow out. You can have students break out into that flexible team learning area. If they're working on a small group project or something, they can just break out there and still have, good access for the students and the staff. And that's the same space that if you could see it off to the right-hand side, that's where we've got those pivot walls. Or the walls can also turn 90 degrees, and then you have access to a classroom. It's a classroom that can be used for science, or it's a classroom that can be used for any other topic. So if you have a science class in there and you say, okay, let's break out and move into the lab, you just move through those pivot walls and access the science lab. There's also some video projectors on those walls too, where you can reduce the number of video projectors theoretically. That you have it on one wall, you turn the wall 180 degrees, you got the video projector on the other side of the wall if you need it. So, in summary, I guess I just wanted to show that there's a variety of approaches that you can do to accommodate your needs. And whether it's an existing facility, there's certainly opportunities to try to repurpose, underutilized spaces. And you can make existing spaces look just as nice and efficient and be just as, integrated with technology and things like that as a brand new building, really.
So I think the key thing that we tried to share with you tonight is just that there is a continuum, and that as we go through this process of creating a district master facilities plan, I think it's important that we don't, at this point, get locked into any particular strategy. It isn't, gee, you got to build a building, or no, we can't possibly build a building, or maybe we just need to work on using new furniture and different strategies. Maybe we need to reorganize existing spaces without actually tearing down walls. Maybe tearing down walls and moving to something that's more flexible in terms of space makes sense. But we felt that this was kind of the last piece you needed to kind of hear about before we reach out to the community. And that really is the next step in this process, is to take us from here to the point where we're ready to hand off again to Mark with next steps. And so as part of that, basically Matt and I have been working on putting together a set of stakeholder meetings. As you can see, it's fairly ambitious. But the idea is we want to have a staff meeting with every staff in the district, including folks at NCRC, and including 2 different meetings for Longfellow, because we really have 2 different groups of staff members that we're operating with. And we would also want to schedule, and have scheduled, a district youth council session to get their thoughts and feedback. The thrust of these meetings will be the concept of saying to folks, let's think about the space that you're in, either as a parent as you think about it with your kids, or as a staff member as you're teaching and working with kids. Talk to us about what's working well with the space you have. Talk to us about what isn't working so well. And talk to us about what would you do differently in this building if you had that opportunity. So it really is kind of an open invitation to people to tell us about how the spaces are working for them. We would be gathering all of that data and doing something, again, fairly similar to what we did with the compañeros discussions, where we would basically start with some this kind of open discussion in small groups, that we would ask people then to reach some consensus in their small groups and then share that consensus information back. We also will do a few minutes at the beginning to kind of give them an overview of what is it we're trying to do here in terms of the overall district master facilities plan. And we're also looking at doing some thinking about how to kind of finish the presentation with a little bit of an overview of the discussion we've had over the last several months. We've had quite a bit of discussion about, whether we start out trying to give them, here's deferred maintenance and here's educational adequacy and whatever. And I think the more we thought about that our concern was that it would stifle people in terms of the thinking. Because if we start out with, well, within a few years you're going to have to put a $2 million roof on this building, I think everybody kind of shuts down and says, well, maybe, we better just put our head down and deal with making sure that envelope is squared away. So our thinking is to try to keep it really open in terms of the initial discussion and get that brainstorming to happen, get some consensus building to occur, and then maybe with the last few minutes of the presentation, give them at least a sense of the kinds of things that we're needing to think about with this. From this set of meetings, which, as you notice, all happens in October, then we would basically deliver the information in terms of all of that we've gathered back to you so that you could have it to look at, and back to ATS&R. And our belief is that at that point then, ATS&R needs to develop what they believe are the credible strategies and plan that we should be looking at. And then we would look at coming back to you likely in December, or probably maybe even more likely in January, to basically say to you, here's what we see as a preliminary plan in terms of that master facilities plan looking out 10 to 20 years. To give you a chance then to respond to that and to discuss that, and then for ATS&R to generate the finalized plan based on the feedback that we get from the board. Our belief is that this maximizes the ability of the staff and the communities, each building community, to respond and share information about their buildings. And it gives ATS&R, I think, the opportunity to have all of that information before they get ready to do a final analysis and put together a preliminary plan for consideration. So that's really what we're about right now. And I know that Mark will answer all your questions if you have them, and Matt and I would be also ready to do that. But really the next step, as we see it right now, is to reach out to staff and reach out to the building communities to hear what they're thinking, and keeping those questions really open and not really narrowing their focus yet, because I think we need to hear how people are really seeing the buildings and facilities that their children are in, or that they're teaching in as teachers, how they're really working for.
And we've already started to advertise the meetings. We sent parents Skylar individually to each building on Friday afternoon, and that'll be the first of a couple that we'll send. We've already invited by building staff to the meeting, and we've already had a number of comments, either via email or in the hall, about how they're really happy that we're starting to talk about this. We've had people, hey, is this the right time to talk about this? And sometimes it's related to the facilities plan, sometimes it's not. We say, but that's okay. Let's get the things out that we're concerned about in terms of crossings and some of those kinds of, we may not be able to solve it with this, but we can at least pass that information along. So we've had a number of very positive comments from people so far. I think people are going to really be engaged in the discussion, which we're excited about.
And again, targeting 45 minutes to an hour, because we know total, because we know physically the timing we have in terms of a time to reach out for staff, and we also know basically the attention span of most adults, which is typically not as long necessarily as kids. And so what we really want to do is...
We're going to have a dynamic plan that's going to engage them throughout the
Yes,
entire...
Matt is going to be
document.
dynamic. I'm just going to stand in front of the door.
We're going to mix up our activities.
Yes,
It's gonna be great.
it will be all good. Questions that we can answer for you or that Mark can answer for you in terms of information?
No?
I have two, and they may be concept questions, maybe too soon, but one on security, more specifically the classroom lockdown, and I'll read so I don't miss anything. It seems to be more difficult to achieve with the concept of removing some walls and increasing space, the size of the spaces, so we can accommodate greater creativity and engagement. How do you deal with classroom lockdown, or is that a different issue?
Yeah, can it be, the idea of trying to create openness and
Secure lockdown.
connectivity versus lockdown. Well, it's just, I guess, something you have to seriously consider. I'm thinking of the example of Austin. Certainly as you enter each house, each house has the ability that you can hit a button, kind of a panic button from the main office, and it shuts down those control doors, those zoning doors as you get to each house. So it stops people from entering the house. If somebody's in the house, at least all those classrooms that we showed did have doors. You even have the garage door, if you will, that can shut. So that building does have good controllability, good lockdown opportunities. Even that engage Tier 4. That example, I believe, would really be almost a house, if you will. So you have the ability to control people as they enter the house. You know what I mean? But once you're in the house, you're right. Once you're in that house, even though you have some individual classrooms and smaller type learning spaces that you can control and lock down, there still are some open spaces that those students and staff would need to, move into some of the smaller or enclosed type spaces. But at least that house, you want the ability to, to secure that house, if you will.
Thank you.
And Noel, we're also hearing some different things now from law enforcement about lockdowns, in terms of they were saying in the old days you got to get everybody in a room, and now they're saying get them out of the building. And so some of the thinking is changing in terms of what we do for a lockdown. And in fact, at that Austin building, there's quite a few exterior exits, and it's in a neighborhood, and I'm sure there's a plan of we're going to get kids out of here and we're going to meet at this space. But the new law enforcement thinking is not to put them in place if there's a serious issue, it's get them out of the building. So I think that's some of the pieces that we're seeing too. Sorry to interject, but I just thought that was appropriate here.
That's good.
You had a second question?
Well, yeah. It's more, I'll save it for another time. It's regarding a specific question on heating, air conditioning. I'll save it for another time.
Okay.
What happened to my mechanical engineers here?
Other questions? Okay, Rob?
I was noticing that with all of the newer things that you were showing, there was a lot of natural light. And I really like this room because there's light that comes in from both sides, and the middle school media center. But when you look at, for example, the Sibley Media Center in the center of a building, or some of the classrooms at Greenvale, some of the classrooms here that are all interior spaces, it would be nice to open them up to get, like you have the clear story windows and things. And I'm just wondering, as an educational investment, how justifiable is it to say we need more natural light in a space? I mean, I taught in a basement classroom in Edina and had a horrible time teaching there, and it makes it really difficult to teach when you don't have natural light. And I think it's an important thing, but it's hard to justify because something so simple that costs a lot of money.
Yeah, I know that there are numerous studies, and I can't specifically quote statistics, but I know that there are many studies that indicate that natural light improves learning and improves, I would even say, test scores and things like that. Your comment about Sibley and some of those, even like that first example or the second example of the Tier 2 of Engage, where we had the windows into the corridor. Not only does that just create the transparency and connection from the corridor to the classroom, but when you're in that corridor, it allows at least those views, maybe some borrowed light from the outside. I mean, it's unbelievable when you're even at that Austin facility, and that's a pretty compact facility that is super efficient. If you see that, there's a fair number of interior teaching spaces. But it's amazing that when you're in a classroom, you can look right through that window right to the outside, and it's a total different experience. So, I mean, I could try to find some of those statistics and studies that talk about how natural light is important for the staff and for teachers, staff and students. No doubt about it.
And then I was wondering, because one of the major deferred maintenance things that is always included is roofs, whether building some of this into those projects so that it's combining deferred maintenance with upgrading, skylights or something, whether that would make it cheaper.
Definitely. And you can do, like the Walmarts, you can do little skylights. You can have little 4-foot by 4-foot skylights, and you can work around the structure. You can have the structure, the bar joists run right through the skylight. But, I've been with some districts, and they say, we're not going to put any skylights. We don't want any penetrations in our roofs. But I don't know. I think that's maybe skylights are better nowadays than they used to be years and years ago, because I don't think that's an issue or a concern. But I think skylights, putting some skylights into some of those internal spaces, like the media center at Sibley, would be.
These aren't even skylights. It's just the roof is
Right.
a little bit. So.
Right. I think that'd be amazing. Plus, from an energy standpoint, if there's skylights in that space, you could turn the lights off, and depending on how many skylights, of course, you could turn the lights off and not even have lights on, a lot of the day, and, save a lot of electricity, a lot of energy. But yeah, I think there's certainly opportunities, whether it be, some borrowed light or skylights, to get some natural light into those interior spaces. And it is important.
Other questions? Julie?
I have one question and one comment. I actually appreciate Noel surfacing the question about security, because I would imagine that'll be one that'll come up with our parents and community members for sure. Having been in those other communities, were you ever a part of their community input meetings?
Community input meetings?
Yes.
Yes.
And what did you find the attendance levels to be at those meetings? And were they structured similar where we're doing it at a building level? And what kind of format maybe you had experience with in terms of how you sort of gain that input in a relatively efficient way from the people in attendance?
Yeah, it varies, of course, among districts, but, I'd say most times the community meetings were, you'd invite the public, but you'd also invite certain people that you wanted to make sure were, try to be in attendance to that meeting, whether it be certain, important community members, mayors, planning commission people, things like that, certain staff, representatives. But it would typically be somewhat of an invited list, but yet then I want to say also open to others that would be interested in participating. And then I think it would be, kind of similar to what your plan here is, to kind of just, first of all, it's very important to find out what's working. It's amazing that there's a lot of good things happening in districts as in your district. So it's wonderful to say, okay, what's working, because we want to make sure we maintain that. And then the next thing, similarly, well, what could we do differently? What's lacking? What are your needs? And then sometimes there's a bit of a kind of a prioritization after that process, where you have small groups, you'd have some reporting, and then at the end of that, trying to have people, sometimes we can use dots, to come up with a list of maybe some needs, and you hand out a certain number of dots possibly to have people go up and place a dot next to the item that they think is of most importance. That seems to work pretty well to try to kind of condense and identify some of those common threads. I think the dots work well. Sometimes people think that, people might be intimidated because they see a lot of other people putting dots on something versus another, but it seems to be kind of a good way to go.
And one other question, and Dr. June, you kind of articulated the process going forward. Would there be a point when the district master facility is ready, then you said it was sort of school board input. Would the community come back and look at that, or?
I think, again, typically, and I'm using most recently experience in Osseo. In Osseo, where we really wanted to look at every single building, we had a staff meeting at every building, we had a community meeting at every building. Because that way, we had nobody coming away saying, I didn't have an opportunity to share my ideas. And what we found is that people tend to want to come to a setting where they see that they have some direct skin in the game. So parents typically want to come to building meetings where it's a building where my child is, or where my child may be coming soon. And I think that piece works well. I think when we get to the preliminary piece, and before we would put this to bed with a final vote, it would be very appropriate then to do a more general community meeting where we would share, here's the preliminary plan, here are the pieces we have, and give people, again, a chance to give us feedback and thought about what's there. What I've not found to be very effective is to do that too early in the process, because especially if you're bringing people in who don't have skin in the game and a vested interest, they really don't tend to be focusing on what's going right with my building or what isn't going right. But once you have a plan and you're saying, I think these are the things we'll do, and here's how we combine the deferred maintenance with the educational adequacy with the 21st century skills piece, then I think it's more likely that you get the interest of community leaders to say, okay, now we're beginning to talk about the big picture pieces and what these things cost and what's there. I think then's a better time to bring other people from the community into the process. And, you know, the proposal we have given to you in terms of these next steps is based on what Matt and I and Mark and other folks from ATS&R perceive this community responds to and needs in order to feel good about the planning that's taking place. So it's really looking at potentially a multiple level of involvement and involvement of people at key points along the way so that we make sure that everybody gets a chance to be heard, but we also hear first from the people that have the most direct experience with the space, which is the staff that's there and the parents and the students that are in the building, which again is the advantage too of bringing the district youth council into this process and doing exactly the same process with them as we're going to do with staff and parents in terms of asking them to give us that same kind of feedback about the building.
So it sounds like, in response to Julie's question, that the process, after we have these community meetings, and then the data is gathered, and then when there is this master plan, it would get presented preliminary. It would get presented to the board, but then it would go out for community input.
That would be, I believe, the best place to do that broader community input feedback piece. When you actually can talk about, and I guess I frame this the same way I'm thinking about when we went through the budget reduction processes a number of years ago. If you remember, what we did is we started with specific groups that met and talked about each particular area of the budget. And it was a fairly small group, but they were the people who were directly impacted, so it was teachers and administrators and parents and whatever who were directly impacted by those pieces. They generated the initial pieces, we generated a plan, and then we went out to the community when we did the public hearing piece and basically said, here's the plan, and now here's your opportunity to respond to that plan. Because I think when you get to that level, people then need to be able to put their hands around what you're talking about doing. Where I think to begin with, your initial piece is you're trying to let people be as free thinking as possible about what's right and what isn't so right in the building, and whether it's natural height, whether it's I want to make sure I've got the right kind of security entrance because I'm concerned about people coming in the building, whether it's, you know, we have these courtyards and they really are not usable at all other than a place for ducks and squirrels to live, to, we don't have big enough spaces for kindergarten classes. I mean, all of those things I think will come out as we have those initial discussions, because the people that are sharing that actually have some firsthand knowledge of the building space. So yeah, I think it's two-pronged, Julie. I think it would be initially with the groups at the buildings with the invitations we've given, and then a second shot once ATS&R has had a chance to put a preliminary plan together that reflects everything that they've heard. Then I think we go back out to the community after we've shared it with you guys. Broad enrollment projections.
Somewhat intentional with meetings. The Greenbelt Park was the first to respond, and they wanted it on, I think it's the 9th, if I'm correct, October 9th.
Mm-hmm.
And that was very intentional for them. I believe Mr. Kraft has a piece. I'm not sure if there's a PTO meeting that night, but I do know that when we're doing those meetings at Sibley and at Bridgewater, the same night, it's the PTO meeting night. So we're going to actually be ahead of the PTO meeting at Bridgewater. So we hopefully have a built-in group of people who might be there for that after the PTO meeting at Sibley. At the high school, we talked about a lot of different options because there's so many events. And what Mr. Lear felt the best chance for us to get really engaged parents, especially in the month of October, was to actually place the meeting on a parent-teacher conference night, which we have done. So the 13th, the parent-teacher conferences run 4 to 8. We're going to have our meeting at 5 o'clock in the, I believe it's in the media center. Oh, the choir room, I'm sorry, yeah. So that's a flexible space. So again, trying to, and then we're taking a page out of Mr. Peshta's playbook at the middle school, and on October 28th, there's a combined choir and orchestra concert that we're doing the meeting at the middle school beforehand, just like Mr. Peshta used to do his coffee and cookies with parents beforehand. So we've had Longfellow is a little bit different because there's so many different needs. We determined one parent meeting would be appropriate there. We're doing it at I believe it's at 6 o'clock, if I recall. That's at the end of the daycare day. So our hope is that we might be able to get some parents who are planning with that. Well, it's just such a diverse group there that that's a more difficult piece. We have a built-in piece at the NCRC because I'm going to guess we're going to have some ECFE families there.
Yeah, we just scheduled it actually right in a parent
Right in a
class,
parent
an
meeting.
ECFE class. So instead of having that parent education component that day, we'll have Matt and Dr. Richardson for that
So
hour.
we've tried to be intentional about, I don't know if it's going to work like we think it will, but it gives us what we believe is the best shot. Plus, we are also being very intentional about how we communicate. The first Skylar went out. We will continue. We're not going to pepper people. We don't want to become spammers, but we're going to be intentional about how we put things in people's mailbox and potentially use some other communication strategies. You'll notice that all of the communication at the building level came from the building principal, because we know that when Dr. Richardson or Matt Hillman sends something out to parents, nobody reads it. But if it comes from Nancy Antoine, they will. And so we have actually worked through and made sure the building principals are the ones that are communicating those meetings to their constituents. So we've had a little bit of thinking. We will learn, and we're trying to learn this strategy for future kinds of parent engagement things. But we looked at what has worked in the past, how can we couch it with things that we already have parents on campus for, and the only thing that I think we could do that we just made a determination with the number of meetings that would be too difficult is we know that two things that get parents in are food, which is very difficult to buy anymore for those kinds of events within the auditor's happiness anyway, and childcare. And to try to arrange childcare for 6 different, we looked at it, it just did not seem doable given the number of meetings that we would have to try to do it at.
All right. Julie?
Well, just along that point, I have a copy of the letter that I received from Greg Delano, and you had indicated that the meetings would be about an hour, and it doesn't say that in the letter. So I don't know if that's been revised since, but as you said, it would be an hour, and I thought, oh, I didn't know that when I read this, that so parents for planning purposes could say, I'm only going to be gone an hour or so.
And we debated upon whether to put the amount of time in there because sometimes an hour might scare people off, sometimes. But in our future communications, I think that we can certainly put that in there to say that it's intended to be an hour. But if we have a group that really is into it, we also don't want to limit them either. On the 13th, we can't go longer than about 90 minutes with the high school because we have a board meeting that night. But we can certainly put the time frame in those upcoming communications. We really wanted to get the dates out there to begin with.
And I totally know what you're saying, but as a parent, I want to know, gee, how long am I
Fair
committed?
point.
And then if there is an engaged group, then some people wouldn't feel bad about walking away.
Got it.
Well, I gave them my hour and that would be okay.
Well, and we're going to frame that both with the parent meetings and staff meetings, because we do know, too, that we have staff that have other commitments in daycare and childcare and other kinds of things. So what we're going to be saying to people is, please, if at all possible, stay at least for this chunk. If you need to leave after this, there's an escape time that makes sense to have that happen. And again, if our experience has been the same as what we've had with compañeros or with the technology transformation discussions, we had people that came, said their piece, and got up and left. And we had other people that I had to drag Matt out an hour and a half after the end of the session because there were people still there that wanted to talk about a particular thing. And I just think we've got to be flexible with this part. The bottom line, however, is I hope that you see the kind of commitment that we have to trying to get the voice of as many people, because I still believe when you get ready to have that public hearing, to be able to say, we have talked to 275 staff members or 300 staff members, and we've talked to X number of parents in 7 different buildings and talked to them about these pieces, and data and ideas and thoughts from those people are incorporated into the preliminary plan. I think you put yourself in a much better position of having people say, I understand now that this is not something that 7 board members or 2 administrators or a cabinet level of folks put together and came to us. It is actually the work of a much larger group, which is really where we want to be with this.
Julie, we'll just make sure to put that, that hour time frame in all the future
Well, just
communications.
to get the honor about, but I appreciate a great deal of thought. A lot of planning has gone into that. You guys accomplished this in a very short amount of time, so I appreciate all the effort it took to get to this point.
It's going to be fun,
Our other thought is that the minute we get into November, now we start having all the other complications of people saying, I got other things I have to do. And so our thought was to get all of these sessions done in October so that the handoff to ATS&R occurs at the end of the month, that they then have a couple of months to work on the preliminary plan before they bring it back. And we're not hedging our bets, but I think that's more likely to be January.
And we're also looking at what is our online piece going to be with this, whether we do a complete blog piece like we have done in some other cases. We want to be able to capture these historically, so when people are looking at the process, depending on which route we take, that they have a place they can go back and look at nearly every discussion. We have all the videos from all of the ATS&R presentations. We have a number of other pieces, and what we want to be able to do in a very positive way is show the entire history of this process, so that if someone comes to it late, just they weren't able to see some of the other things we were doing before, they realize that, oh, look at all the steps that the district has taken to try to engage people, to really be thoughtful about this, and I think that will be something that will be helpful. We're still just determining what strategy should that take this time around.
Other questions? So I really appreciate, I know that I talked to Dr. Richardson about the dates and the thought that went into that, but just the process, and I think you're right, Matt, having it be transparent and documented so that people can join at different points in time. And I like the idea that, you have this, but you're flexible too, in terms of the format and getting people's input. I have one question for you, Mark. It seems to me that people are going to be really fascinated with the whole idea of moving more to open spaces, particularly when with Greenville Park we've been all along struggling with that, having been an open building. Mm-hmm. So with those garage doors and the idea of having more transparency in buildings, what does that do in terms of acoustics and distraction? I mean, are those more soundproof than we envision?
Well, when they're down, certainly, yeah. When the partitions are closed, adaptable partitions or the pivot walls or even those garage doors, they have good acoustics. Yeah, so I'd say that's not so much of a concern. What I thought you were getting at as well, what about the distractions when they're open, mm-hmm. right? But I think that's just part of that environment, and that's like when I walked the building with the principal at Greenbelt Park, that's the open building.
Right.
I mean, I thought he'd say something about, I'm concerned about the open classrooms and the disruption, and you can hear from him. He just said that he really liked that space, and it just, it was not an issue. And so, there are lots of buildings that are designed with open classrooms, and I think it just maybe takes, it seems like it's, I think, less of an issue for the students who seem to be able to, students can multitask and they can be, doing many things at once without really being distracted by others, So I guess acoustically, if they're down, they're good acoustically, but if they're open, yeah, there's opportunities. But I think it's just something that people get used to, and it's just part of the whole environment,
Okay.
I think the key piece there too is if we get to that point of saying, gee, this is something we'd like to pursue, it isn't the concept of it has to be one or the other. And I think when we saw most of the open spaces buildings being built in the 1970s, which is Greenbelt time frame, the frame was you build it open, and really there was no way to close it up. And what we found with Greenbelt Park is you couldn't put garage doors and other pieces in because the heating and ventilation system would stop you from doing that, because it's set up that it has to run in a way that to balance air and air exchange, you have to have spaces open at the top. Where if you design a building now, the concept is flexibility that says you can have a closed space when you want it. You can have an open space when you want it. And as a teacher, you decide what works the best for the students that you're working with at the time. If they need to be in a closed session because you're doing a teacher-led presentation or you're doing a science experiment, great. But if you're in a situation where you want these kids to be able to go out and mingle with kids from the other 3 or 4 sections of that particular grade level, you want the doors to be up and you want kids to feel comfortable moving into a center space and having those opportunities. You can't do that if you got a building that's either corridors with doors and no windows or whatever, or you have an open building. I think the design that we would talk about, if we move that direction, really moves to a flexible space that changes based on the needs that people have.
I think the other thing that really has been powerful, the thing that I've come away in this process with, what Chris is describing, is that buildings, no matter what we choose to do, whether it be nothing or whether it be to the other end, buildings need to come with an instructional manual. And so, professional development about how to use new spaces is probably, is more important than it ever has before. I've visited IG Holt and I've been through that building with all the garage doors and stuff. The acoustics are excellent. When those garage doors are down, you can't hear it. And they have so many people touring. The kids there are so immune to us. When we were walking through it, they didn't even notice us. But part of it is because there was some very intentional instruction of how do we use these new kinds of spaces. And I think that's just a piece we need to keep in mind as we move forward too.
Other questions? Did you get what you needed to from the board?
I believe we have our marching orders.
Okay.
We have a busy October.
Yes, you do. I really appreciate all
good.
the effort.
All good.
All right. Thank you, Mark.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, we are ready to move on to our first item for individual action, which is the proposed 2014 pay 2015 property tax levy.
Very exciting to a potential yawner, where somebody's going to pay bills. So this is our preliminary levy certification, and as you well know, this is something that we do on an annual basis, typically at this meeting. And what is kind of frightening is that tonight officially kicks off the budgeting process for the 2015 school year, and kids have been in school all of about 15 minutes. So we are already preparing for next school year, and that process begins tonight. So we always think it's a great idea to remind us what the levy is, what we're talking about. We're talking about the portion of our school district revenue that represents about 22% of our overall budget. It includes voter-approved levies, things like our operating levy that the community has so generously approved for us to be able to provide a world-class education, in addition to things like state-approved levies, things that we have a chance to levy for through statutory authority. Something I want to highlight tonight is the ECFE levy, which we are excited that the state has finally put into place, that the ECFE portion of our levy, which isn't huge, but the ECFE portion of the levy is now tied to the formula allowance. So when the formula allowance goes up, so will the ECFE allowance. Now, it's a very small percent. I think it's like 0.023 or something ridiculously small like that, but it's a start. So that's an example of a statutory authority levy that our voters didn't approve, but the legislature did for us. And of course, the key thing at 23% of the budget, the levy allows us an opportunity to provide really quality educational programming that we have here in the Northfield schools. So as we think about the truth in taxation timeline, which is really what this starts, hopefully we will approve the preliminary certification tonight. And as you know, we'll be looking to do the preliminary certification at what's called the max. That's when we actually enter into the state levy system, because they are already continuing to do new runs every day of what is the appropriate authority. And we believe, as you've seen in the documents I've sent you, and we'll talk about, that we're going to have around a 2% increase this year. We will send the levy information to the county, the preliminary information, by September 30th. Then what happens is the county begins to prepare those tax statements. The thing that many people look so forward to in November is getting those proposed taxpayer statements in their mail from the county. Then on December 8th, we'll have our Truth in Taxation meeting along with our regular board meeting, and then that evening we'll also ask you to certify the final pay 2015 levy. And then the county begins to prepare the tax bills, and that process begins. The other thing I think is important to remember is that these two processes, the levy year and the budgeting year, don't exactly match up. So the levy year goes from January to December, and the budget year goes from July to June. So the taxes that are collected from January through December of 2015 actually support us during the 15-16 budget year. And another piece that every finance person has reminded you since the dawn of time is that there can be adjustments for up to 3 years past that initial year. And so every year, in fact, the current levy document that we get is 37 pages long of a very small type and mostly numbers. And the last half to maybe 2/3 of the document are the adjustments for the last years. In some cases, we have none in a certain area, but there will be things like our lease levy or some other health and safety where there's a continuous adjustments as real numbers come in. So that process can be adjusted up to 3 years after the actual pay year. Some notable changes other than the ECFE piece that I mentioned. This is the first year that we're going to the new referendum calculation. You recall that was a big topic at the legislature last year. We're moving from the resident pupil units to the adjusted pupil units. Now the state has promised we will be held harmless, and they have a calculation that will get the exact same amount of money with the new calculation that we would have with the old calculation, though they haven't been as forthcoming with telling us how long they will hold us harmless. But we know for pay 15, they are going to hold us harmless under the adjusted pupil units, the new calculation, which is intended to be more transparent. This is the first year of that. Another piece that is coming along with that particular change is MDE knows that most school districts, including us, are very conservative when it comes to our student counts. And so, for example, when Val and I do our student projections, we typically will take the January actual enrollment, move it forward, and then we will subtract 3%. We would always much rather have a positive adjustment in the coming years than a negative adjustment. MDE was cautioning all districts this year to be closer to what they think their actual is because of the change in this process. So we are still being conservative and projecting about 1% less than we normally, or 1% less than our actuals in January. So we're still being conservative, just not as conservative as Val and I would like to be, but we are rule followers, and MDE is saying this is what you would do next year. And also, something that makes Dr. Richardson very happy is that the Uniform General Education Levy is making a return after probably a decade on the sidelines. It's very small. That's why we say it's kind of sort of returning. It's returning in the form of the Student Achievement Levy, but Dr. Richardson never passes up an opportunity to give a history lesson about the Uniform General Education Levy, so I thought I would give him the opportunity at this time.
Very quickly, until Jesse Ventura took office, we had a Uniform General Education Levy, and it was used to fund part of the funding for every school district. And what it allowed was making sure that across the board in every school district, there was the same levy generated, and the difference between what you needed and what you got from that general levy was added to by the state. Well, when Jesse came in, Jesse's approach was, we're going to take over the whole thing because we're in really good budget shape right now. And they decided to move to 100% funding through state aid and took the general fund uniform levy out. And when that happened, as you know, well, you know what happened then for the next 15 years, is that we have ended up being much impacted by the cycles of prosperity and recession, which the state had no ability to deal with. And so what ended up happening instead is local districts had to use a lot of operating levy as the strategy for replacing dollars they didn't get in state aid. It is important when Matt says sort of, this is about $70,000. Remember, we have a $41+ million, $42 million budget. So this is not going to be the savior or the cure, but it does put a placeholder in place that if at some point down the road the state decides that it needs to make the general fund basic levy more not subject to the whims of the economy, then they could expand the general uniform levy and help to offset that. So that's where we are right now.
The way they're framing it
That's
is really a
end of the
placeholder
lesson.
to get it started. I mean,
Yes.
Tom Elchers talks about that we're just really happy we got it back in.
Yeah.
And that's a really important piece. There's some other changes that affect a lot of other districts, but not necessarily us. If you remember last week, talked about something called location equity revenue. That was $424. There was a group of districts in the state that got that. There were a group of other rural states or rural districts in the state that got $212. There was this group of districts in the middle who got nothing. The legislature changed the name to local optional revenue, and now every district in the state has access to it. No change for us because we're getting exactly what we got last year, but that was probably the bigger change for most districts in the state. Otherwise, compared to last year when we're talking about the changing of the pupil weights and all those kind of fun things, it's a pretty quiet year on the levy front in terms of notable changes. So this particular graph here is just, I think, is good to show us what is the, how does it represent in a pie graph in terms of our overall levy. Obviously, the general fund piece, the referendum is the pieces that are a lot of our voter-approved components. The other are things like local optional revenue, things like health and safety, operating capital, those kinds of pieces. Debt services, obviously, for the buildings that we are still paying for. That capital project slip that we're so thankful that the community has provided us on an annual basis. And then you'll see our very small percentage of the community services levy makes up of it. There's some other pieces within these pieces of the pie, but they're just small enough we incorporate them. So we just think it's good to see what the graphical piece is there when you look at how that money is distributed. This is the really important slide in terms of if you look at the left or the lower left where we're seeing what we're actually asking to certify the preliminary levy at. It's $15,582,743.74. And again, that demonstrates a 2% increase over last year's. And one of the pieces that you'll know is that our debt service continues to have some changes. And again, that's a result of our bonding refundings and those kinds of pieces. So we're seeing that go down just a slight amount, but that's a piece of good stewardship continuing as we move forward. And we think that that's an important piece. So this is just showing you the proposal, and this is the actual truth and taxation categories that we will use. So this is why we frame this slide in this way. Finally, something we haven't done in the last couple of years and we thought would be good to show you is just a 5-year comparison of our levies. And we go back to pay 11 when we were down just about 2.5% over the pay 10. K-12 is the big year when the last operating levy was approved, so that's why we saw a significant increase that year. K-13 was important because that's the year that the market homestead credit, if you remember, went away, and so the district intentionally under-levied that year to help taxpayers as they were transitioning to that increase that every homeowner was going to experience. So in that case, the levy went down a little bit. Last year was a small levy decrease, and this year we're looking at just going up just 2%. Overall, minus the year where we had the large increase because of the operating levy passage, we try to be stable and pretty reasonable. And so, again, our tradition for most of the time has been, as you know, over the last 10 years or so, that we ask you to certify the preliminary levy at the max. So if we were to look at our analysis, the Pay 2015 levy is a 2% increase compared to Pay 2014. That one of the pieces, just to let you know, remember our referendum, our operating levy referendum has that inflationary index with it. That's part of the increase, and also that new student accounting also plays a role as we're up in terms of the students that are counted for that particular piece. So again, what we're asking you in the end is we're proposing that the Pay 2015 levy at $15,582,743.74 be approved, and that represents a 2% increase. Now remember, this is just a preliminary. You have a chance to come back in December to do the final piece, which we can make changes between now and then should you choose to do so. So I'd be happy to stand for any questions that I can at this time.
So board members, well, Matt is happy to stand for questions. This is an item for individual action, so I'd like to have a motion in a second on the table before we move into questions.
So moved.
So Julie is moving to support the superintendent's recommendation for the 2014 payable 2015. And seconded by Noel. All right, questions? Go ahead, John.
And just to clarify this, we're looking at approving this as a dollar amount, but when you're doing this, this is a calculation based on an evaluation of what you think the students are, because our levy is in fact based on a student count. Is that right?
That is correct.
So based on our enrollment projections, this is what you're suggesting that we need. When the legislature increased the funding with I believe it was $300 per student last year, is that money expired, or is that still counted in there?
Well, I think you're talking about the formula allowance.
Right.
The formula allowance is what we generally get, most of which is straight in state aid. Now, some of that can come through. Many of these levies are part of a mix of aid and levy of certain funding categories, but what you're referring to really is what the state put on the formula, which is mostly state aid.
Right. But in terms of the amount of money that it was, we were looking at...
The number $300 isn't... trying to remember.
That number's bigger than it is, John. We looked at basically, I thought it was 1.5%.
Yeah, it was 1.5%.
Over the 2 years of this last biennium.
And then we got a little bit of additional
And then this year, when this legislative session finished, they added 0.5%. So the increase over the 2-year period was 2% in terms of the general fund formula, which I think is more like $200.
Yeah, that's right.
It's about $100 a percent.
But the increase in state funding then for the school year that we're talking about, which is really the next school year, is actually just 0.5% from the current
in the state portion, and what we're talking about tonight are the local portions of those pieces. So.
I understand it, but I'm just trying to make sure that we
From the formulaic perspective, you're right, in terms of about a half. I seem to remember it was $25 a student, if I remember correctly. Maybe it was $50 this time around.
I think.
So it winds up then for state aid for 2015, 2016 winds up being just 0.5% more
That is correct.
than it is for the current school year.
That is
No,
correct.
I don't believe so. The biennium was 2013 13-14 and 2014-15. That's the 2% in terms of new
Because
state aid.
next year is actually the budget year.
Yeah,
and they're not
so our
calculated.
budget year, again, runs from last July 1st through June 30th of 2015.
The 0.5% was in addition to what
Right.
they had provided
And
last
that
year.
0.5% was what we got for the 14-15, the current year we're in. For 15-16, the levy piece is now we're going out the next year into the future to identify the amount of money that needs to come from local property tax in terms of the operating levy as well as the debt service levy, et cetera. So we don't know yet what the money will be for 2015-16 or 2016-17 in terms of the general fund format.
Because
that hasn't been
that
decided
will be
yet.
set in the next legislative session.
That will be set in the
after
next
the election.
session, typically by about the end of May of 2015 is when you'll actually know what the funding from the state is for 2015-16.
And it's unusual for them to give the additional dollars in the second year of the biennium.
Extremely unusual.
So it really affects the 14-15 year,
Yeah.
those additional dollars that they gave this past May.
Right. Yeah.
Thank you.
Other questions? Rob?
Okay, I'm just hazy here. Thinking about last year, when there was we were allowed to levy a certain amount, but we didn't levy the entire amount. And part of the reasoning I think I remember is that there's a voter-approved amount that we didn't want, that we wanted to hold to that, so we didn't. And if we levied more, it would go over this amount that was voter-approved or something.
That was a couple of years ago, actually, and they changed the way. Last year, we did levy at the max, in terms of, even though we levied a little bit less than what we had the previous year, about 0.52%, last year's levy was done at the max. It was a couple of years ago when they had changed some of the formulas, and Chris, you were working with that at the time, where we, but it was around the operating capital piece. Do you remember that component?
Well,
We had that-
I think the piece Rob is specifically talking about is that when they did the calculation for the $750 capital
Yeah.
budget, which was a capital levy that we did separately, what they ended up doing is giving us a number that was actually bigger than $750,000. And so at that time, Stephanie and Val came to us and said, understand you can levy this amount because you have authority from the state to do so, but we recommend, and Matt and I agreed, that no, we should only levy enough to generate the $750 or $750,000 of capital project levy. So that's the piece we did at that particular time.
And that's
so we
been
actually
fixed
under-levied
since
that
then.
piece.
And that has been fixed since
Yeah,
then,
that's
so we
been
don't need
fixed
to
so
do
that we don't have that problem again.
But last year, even though we levied less than the year before, we still levied at the max. And that's what we're suggesting this year as well. It's 2% more than compared to last year, but it's still at the max that the state allows us. Is that helpful?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Other questions? All right. We have a motion and a second on the table to support the superintendent's recommendation to certify the county auditor's 2014 payable 2015, and that is the amount of $15,582,743.74. So, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you.
Thanks, Matt. And our next item for individual action is the World's Best Workforce Annual Report.
And as Mary's coming up to the podium, again, I think kudos to Mary and Aaron and a number of other people that have helped us work through the process of the creation of the World's Best Workforce Annual Report. As you know, this is something that we have been waiting for them to give us information about. We actually got that information the end of the week after we talked about it at the board meeting. They basically sent us a template that was 2 pages long for a document that was only supposed to be 1 page long with information put in it. So we've now decided that really the summary size really is not a valid restriction. And so what we determined is just to build the best report that we could build and to provide as much information to our community, to the board as we can. And Mary is going to walk you through, again, she's not going to click on every link, but to share with you how we have framed putting together this report. Remember, this replaces our current per report, so we no longer do the other annual report. This now is live and ready to go on our website. So once you approve it, we will send this off to the Department of Ed, and we will also make it live so that people in the community can look at it. Mary.
Thank you. Well, good evening, and thank you for the opportunity to present the report on the world's best workforce. And this public report fulfills some of the requirements in the legislation for the world's best workforce. And first of all, as Dr. Richardson pointed out, this is a joint effort, and we need to thank Matt and Aaron, Dr. Richardson, Hope Langston, and Heather Kohinka, who spent a lot of time putting together the website. They were the main contributors to this. And as we go through this, you will see that there are obviously people who are contributing to this on a daily basis, and very much too many to mention tonight. So the Northfield Public Schools World's Best Workforce replaces the annual report, as Dr. Richardson told you. And following the requirements and statute, this report must be posted on our website, and it did go live this afternoon. So when you go to our Northfield homepage, instead of seeing annual report, you will see a button for World's Best Workforce. So if you click on that, you will get to this page. So we'll start here. And then a summary of this is supposed to be submitted to the department. And ours is essentially a 6-page report if you would print out just the report. But if you print out all of the...
And you actually have that in your materials, the 6-page summary.
Right. The State Department had originally said it would be a 1-page report. They provided us a 2-page template. We managed to get it to 6 pages. However, if we printed out everything from all of the links, we would be well into the hundreds of pages. So we are providing an overview of this report tonight, and you may go on the website tonight or tomorrow and click through every one of them. So let's begin. So we begin on the school's main webpage, and we click to here. And on this page, we start with the legislation that is requiring us to do this, so that is there. And then the summary of our district, including the celebrations and challenges document. And you'll notice that these that are underlined are live links. So if we click there, you will be taken immediately to the celebrations and challenges page, and you can read through that. I have to get used to this mouse, and then we can go back to the main page. So any of these that are underlined would be live links. Then we move into our Northfield plan, and we go through the DPAC, the District Educational Program Advisory Council, and how they work and how that fits into the strategic plan. And we have a graphic here that shows how we organize our work here in the district. It also talks about professional learning communities and where our SMART goals are. And we wanted to highlight, too, that our district is more than just schools. We also are tightly connected to the community and the Northfield Promise. So if you go down to this list, all of these are live links that you can connect to find out information on any of those subjects. And if we click on DPAC, we get to the DPAC page where you can find out all about the goals and the meetings for DPAC. We aren't going to connect to any of the school improvement plans or progress reports because each school will be presenting to the board on a different night and going through all of the information that's found on there. Currently, this link will lead you to last year's report, and then as the schools update their reports, we will put them live. So that points out another nice feature of doing our report this way. It can be updated as we go. We don't have to wait till September of next year and have Heather really trying to work to get everything put on here. As it's updated, it will be updated here. And it's very important that we highlight the Northfield Promise, and that link takes you right to their webpage. The next part of the report includes the areas the State Department asked for information on, and these are identified needs based on data, support category with the subcategories of students, teachers, principals, systemic building or district, best practice strategic and action steps, current achievement plans, and key indicators of implementation progress. And under each of these headings, there are no live links, but it's a list and a description of what we have currently here in Northfield to support that topic. And the topics, the 5 that were identified, are worded with the State Department's words. We didn't want them to have to search for anything. We wanted them to be able to find what they had asked for. The next part of the report includes the broad outcomes impacted. And these, again, are the 5 components that we looked at the plan last March. Again, these are the State Department's words, and these will include the links, the live links to each one. So the first one is all students ready for kindergarten. And under that, you will see 8 links that detail what we are doing to meet this objective. And if we click on, for example, Bridges to Kindergarten, that takes us right to the community service page that provides all of the information on Bridges to Kindergarten. And we can go through any of these other links that support having all students ready for kindergarten. And it's in this last section with these 5 components where you would find our district SMART goals tool. The next category is all students in 3rd grade achieving grade level literacy. And again, we have several links here. And one of our partners, again, is Accelerate Northfield, and it will take you right to their webpage. It talks about how you can volunteer and how we can get our children reading well by 3rd grade. Another one that's new and underdeveloped, under development, not underdeveloped, under development is our RTI webpage, and our RTI coaches are working on this, the response to intervention, and it's a page that we believe will be used mainly by teachers. We're not going to go into too much on this page because I think the RTI coaches will present it to you in more depth later, but it lists the core, what we have for core instruction and interventions and fidelity and integrity checks for each of the interventions. Reading is not complete right now. We started with math, which is why I showed that one. But that, again, will show and provide some evidence of what we are doing to have all students achieving grade level literacy. The 2014 literacy report is a template from the state, and there may be some technical difficulties when you get to that. We had some technical difficulties, but it's their template, so that's what we used. The third component is closing the achievement gap, and there are 22 links here that highlight the work we are doing to close the achievement gap. And again, we're not going to look at the individual plans because we will be looking at those later. But here you can get to the assessment calendar and find the assessments that we give and when we give them in our district. And again, the state is emphasizing SMART goals. In this section alone, we would have over 81 SMART goals posted, and each of the schools and sites have 2 or 3 SMART goals. So if we look here.
And I just would interject as Mary is going through this. This was probably the piece where we struggled the most, because the concept or the presentation from MDE was that you should have a goal for each area. A single SMART goal for each area. We looked at that and said, thinking about what we do for kids, we've got multiple SMART goals for each building, and we have at least one SMART goal for each PLC. So we have 110 or so SMART goals operating at any one time. And our feeling was that we wanted to share that information to them so that they understood the complexity of what you're trying to do, as opposed to trying to create some kind of umbrella goal that doesn't necessarily fit anybody very well. And in all honesty, we don't know exactly how the department is going to respond to that. But the reality is, the model that we have used in this district for the last decade has been this concept of top-down with the umbrella and bottom-up, because we built the goals from the building level and from the PLC level. And we believe it's important to have all of those goals shared with the community. So if I'm a Bridgewater parent and I want to look at the Bridgewater improvement plan and the progress report and whatever, I don't want to look at a goal that just says we're going to increase reading by X% across the system, but not focused on my building or my kids. I want to look at what has Bridgewater decided they want to do in terms of the growth in reading and mathematics. And so the data that we have available for them through this process lets them drill down and get to the data that makes sense. We think that's the right way to go. We may find out it's not, but it's the direction we're taking you right now.
Right, so if we click here, we can go into the Bridgewater. That's because that happens to be the first one on the list alphabetically. And we can look at their evidence of practice, which each PLC has to submit twice a year, once at the end of the first semester and once at the end of the year. And we can see their SMART goal and then find out their evidence of impact and their next steps. And we can do that for each building and each PLC. So again, if we printed these out, we post, right now we have 81 posted for the sites. We sometimes do not post if it's a special ed goal and if the students would be identifiable, because we do want to preserve that. So that's where all of the evidence of practice reports. So again, if we printed those out, we'd already be at over 81 pages in our report. And to get that down to 1 page is, with all of the rest of the information, would be a ludicrous task at best. We also have included beyond the school day and school year opportunities here, because that is something that we are doing to help close the achievement gap. And again, that links right to the page where you can find out all the information on that, including high school, summer school. So if you're only interested in that, that would take you right to those pages. We also connect to the teacher development and professional growth plan. So that's what we are doing to close the achievement gap. The climate survey of parents is done every year, and we have this divided out by buildings. So that, again, if you're interested in the climate at your building and how parents perceive it, you may click on this one. The fourth component is all students career and college ready for graduation. So this is the list of what we do, and we have several links here. The first one will take you to the testing results. And we start with math testing. And we go to the MCA proficiencies. And again, we're not going to spend a lot of time or go into much detail on this, but you can see it by subgroup in reading and math in the entire district, and science. We look at the Explore test, which we administer in the 8th or 9th grade. And again, the gold bar is the national averages, if it's difficult to read, and the maroon bar is Northfield. And we have the results of the plan test, which is administered in 10th grade. And then we go to the ACT. We also have a link to get to the Minnesota report card tool on this page, so you can go there if you want even more in-depth information on assessment results. The career exploration, we put 8th grade student-led conferences there. That does not have a specific web page, so we linked to the newspaper report on that. And then we also include the 4-year course plan that each student is completing before they begin their high school. And the last component of the 5 is that all students will graduate. Again, you can go to the Explore plan and ACT assessment results, which we just looked at, the 9th grade academy and 10th grade seminar, the torch page, and you can go to the MDE, there we go, working quite quickly tonight too, and find out graduation rates, and this is right at the MDE report card site. So you can look at Northfield and statewide. We had 91.2% last year, and the state average was 79.8%. And the final piece is to put a budget picture to provide support that most of our budget goes to direct instruction, pupil, and instructional support. And you can see by the graph that 81.2% of the budget goes to that area. So this is a very brief tour of the World's Best Workforce website and annual report. And as you can see, it would be several hundred pages if we printed it all out. So it's condensed to this, to this 6 pages with all of the corresponding links. And our next steps are to have it approved, and then Dr. Richardson will submit it to MDE, and we will wait to hear their feedback as to where we go next. And in one of the next several school board meetings, we'll be presenting the World's Best Workforce updated plan and some of the things that we're currently working on and that would add to this report, either as we complete them throughout the year or by the end of the year for next fall. So, are there any questions?
So, once again, board members, since this is an item for action, I'd like to have a motion and a second on the table first. So, Carrie moves to approve the superintendent's recommendation.
Second.
John's first? All right. Seconded by John. So, questions for Mary? Carrie?
Well, I don't have a question, just a comment. I am very impressed, and I applaud you for putting this together with so little guidance from the state. I think it's, just really a testament to how you completely understand what we're trying to do here, and I think it's great to have it all in one place. So I really, really appreciate your work on this.
Right, that's the nice thing about it. It does give you an idea of the depth and richness of what's happening in our district. To condense that to a one-page report is probably an insurmountable task. So, yeah, this represents work by a lot of people and a lot of input.
I think the good thing that we've had with this has been that this really is it's just the delivering what we've already been doing for a decade. And yes, we've added pieces to it. We've added RTI, we've added PBIS, we've added more with the career and college readiness pieces. But if you really think about the overall plan of driving a strategic plan and DPAC goals, 2 buildings to make decisions about the improvement goals that they're going to have for student achievement, and then you bring the PLCs in to do specific grade level or subject area goals that really impact teachers and kids directly. You know, we were already there and far beyond, I think, before the state got to it. I think the biggest concern I think we have will be when they're trying to read through several hundred of these, 340 or so, whether they're going to really grasp the depth. Obviously, we're going to give them a version that will allow them to look at all the different pieces, and if we're called upon, we will walk them through those pieces. But our sense is that when you were given a 2-page template that had blanks at the end of each part saying, add stuff here, that we already had the message that it couldn't be done in 2 pages. So we think the 6-page is probably appropriate in terms of the data, but there's just so much that we have available, and Mary and Heather and all the other folks that have worked with this at this table and others, I think have really done, I hope, a good job in terms of putting that all out so the community can see it.
No?
I appreciate the report. Thank you. I suspect there are people at the State Department that when they get a question, they refer to Northfield and say, well, what Northfield did.
Well, we'll see. Yeah.
Say that in all seriousness. Thank you.
Other questions? Julie?
Just a similar comment. Amazing. I think it's so, it was a forced thing upon us, but I think we're coming out much richer on the other end of it, because I think it really does demonstrate what a laser focus we have on student achievement. And I think it's great for parents who are coming into the district or looking to come into the district to have this one place to really get an overview of what we do and how good we are. My only question was the general fund expenditures. Did we add that on our own, or was that a request on the template for us to do that?
That's a request. It was also part of the annual report.
Okay.
It traditionally had been a piece of the annual report that we had always had to do. But there is actually a place where they cryptically talk about it in the actual statute in terms of information about what resources do you have to ensure that you're going to be able to continue to provide the instructional program and the professional development to keep that process going. And our feeling was this shows people how much we are putting into the direct instruction as well as how much is going into professional development on a yearly basis to keep that going.
Perfect. Thank you.
Other questions? No? I again would echo everybody's comments about balancing having this be a resource for the community, and then the fact that you use the words that the state is going to be looking for. I mean, nice, very nice.
We hope so.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well,
we were strategic.
You were strategic.
Yes.
We have a motion and a second on the table to support the superintendent's recommendation to approve the World's Best Workforce Annual Report as presented. All those in favor of approving it say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Report is approved. Thank you, Mary. And everybody else. Huge effort. We are ready to move on to the consent grouping, and I will remind board members there were a few additional items Dr. Richardson pointed out that have been added to the consent grouping, including the savings on our new copier lease and a new district youth council representative. Is there anything anyone wishes to pull from the consent grouping? Okay. With that, I would ask for a motion to approve the consent grouping. Moved by Ann.
Second.
Seconded by John. All those in favor of approving the consent grouping say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. All right. There are no items for information this week. Full week. We have plenty on the top end, I guess.
Yes, I think we're good there.
All right, with that, we have future meetings coming up in October already, October 13th and the 27th. With that,
I was going to say, I think we might mention too that
oh,
we're needing to work with Joel to determine a date for the commended student presentation. And we will do that because we really have kind of told the high school, your responsibility to create this forum. You know, we'll be happy to be there and we'll be happy to support it, but it's really the high school's piece. So as soon as we have a date locked in on that, we will share that with you, because that'll mean we'll need to start earlier with that and then start the board meeting a little later.
all right.
Okay?
Well, stay tuned.
Stay tuned.
So with that, I would ask for a motion for adjournment.
Move adjourned.
Moved by Noel,
Second.
seconded by John. All those in favor of adjourning the meeting say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. The meeting is adjourned.